Welcome to My Hometown, the program that explores clubs, organizations, businesses, and issues across Nassau and Suffolk counties and sheds light on the different towns that are making a difference.
Hello, and welcome to My Hometown. I'm Bill Horan, along with my co-host, Nassau Community College student, Mike DeMarco.
Today, you're about to meet Micah Dank, a local author who grew up in Rockville Center, now lives in Baldwin, who has written 7 books into a series on astro-theology called Into the Rabbit Hole.
Micah, welcome to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. What made you want to be an author?
I had no intention on being an author. It's not that I was against it. I graduated, I went to Nassau here, and then I transferred and I went to Hunter College in the city and I got an English degree. I was working at a mortgage bank at the time, and then 2008 hit and everything collapsed. So I applied for grad school, and I'd gotten into LIU's English education. Then I'd gotten a job that same week at a logistics company. So I thought, and it was my first career job. So I thought, okay, I could either take out a ton of loans, the market's unstable, or I could just start working. So I started working. Then in about 2012, I had gotten through the company that I was working for, one of our clients offered me a job, and I moved to Boston with an ex that I'm no longer with. And we were in a really nice community. What basically happened was we didn't really know many people, but she was on the TV a lot because we didn't really know a lot of people. So she would just be on TV. I think the iPad had just come out.
When you say on TV, you mean watching TV?
Watching TV.
Oh, watching. Yeah. Oh, I thought you mentioned
No. She would watch TV, and the iPad had just come out. So I started going down rabbit holes, all these kind of conspiracy theories. And
now I'm going to just stop you for a minute, both for myself and for our listeners. When you say going down a rabbit hole, how do you define a rabbit hole? What is that?
It's just information that you've never heard of before and things that's kind of sort of hidden from people.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a cult, so to speak, but it's just basically information that not a lot of people know and kind of bringing it to light. So I started studying all these bizarre things. And I came across this one gentleman named Jordan Maxwell, who was an astro-theologer. And he was talking about a biblical verse where the disciples were asking Jesus, where they're going to have Passover. And he said, go into town, and when you go into town, you'll see a man holding a water pitcher. Follow him to his house, right? Because that's what the phrase is. And he made the point that the man with the water pitcher was actually Aquarius, which Aquarius is actually a man holding a water pitcher. And a house is what a zodiac sign is in. There's 12 houses. Whatever your zodiac sign is that you are, that's the house of that. So that would be the house of Aquarius. So I thought that was interesting. It was an interesting decoding. And then I kind of piggybacked that and bounced it off of one of my friend's ideas online. I bounced that idea. And what ended up happening was he sent me a video to this guy, Santos Bonacci, who was also an astrotheologer, and he just opened my mind to it. And it was the most incredible thing that I had ever come across. It completely opened my mind to everything, the way I read the Bible, the way I changed everything. So I studied this for hours and hours and hours a day. What I ended up deciding was I had to write about it. Now, I'd studied your George Orwell, 1984. I studied Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. I studied 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne. Anything Philip K. Dick wrote, Minority Report, things of that nature. And I realized if you want to tell truth to people, the best way to do it is to broaden your horizons, is to tell it in fiction. So when I realized that, or I came to that realization, I decided to start writing. So one book turned into, I wrote the first book, and I started pitching it to agents, and I couldn't get an agent. I had 100 rejections. And then finally, one of the last people I pitched to picked it up. I'm sorry, let me bring it back a little bit. I couldn't get an agent, so I self-published the first book, the book that you guys have right here.
And that's Beneath the Veil, is that correct?
Into the Rabbit Hole, Beneath the Veil. That's the first book, yes. I self-published it. And then what happened is I wrote the second book, and the second book landed me an agent because she really liked it. So what ended up happening was we worked it up. She started pitching it to publishing houses. What happened was they got a lot of good feedback for the second book, but they didn't want to pick it up because it was mid-series. So I had a different pen name at the time. I had a different title. My original title was called Decoding the Phoenix, and I had a pen name. So what I did was I scrubbed it because I'd been on a couple local papers with it and then done some press and everything. So I scrubbed it off of the internet, and we rebranded it with my actual name as the pen name and changed the title. And we pitched the first book, and I had like another 100 rejections from publishing houses, and we were about to give up. Finally, the second to last or the last publishing house said, okay, but we're not going to give you an advance on it, but we will, we'll give it a shot. So the publishing house that I'm part of is called Speaking Volumes, and they're an award-winning publishing house based out of Naples, Florida.
That's a good name for a publishing house.
Speaking
I like
Volumes.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. And what they did was they signed me for 3. So I only had 2 at the time. So I wrote a third, and then 3 became 6. 6 became 7. 7 became 8. Now I'm working on a 9th. And
wow.
this particular publishing house, they love series. It's not a publishing house where you're just going to get one off. They don't usually pick up a lot of single books. They like series. They like to take it there. So I did that, and then I ended up coming out with a kids' astrology book that I published too. It's called A is for Aries, and it's for 6 to 11-year-olds, and I did that with my astrologer. I basically have an open-ended publishing deal with this publishing house, and the books have become very well received. And my publicist right now, 2 weeks ago, started pitching my book series to TV producers because we had it converted in the first half of the first book converted into a screenplay.
So you're like the James Patterson of astro-theology. And for those who don't know, James Patterson is all over the mystery thrillers.
Yeah.
He has a bestseller every 2 weeks.
He does. I do a lot of research into my books. It's called Into the Rabbit Hole because there's a lot of rabbit holes. Some example of some rabbit holes, I don't write about these particular ones, but some rabbit holes would be like the truth behind 9/11 or the truth behind Vietnam, things of that nature.
Gotcha.
Okay, so it's that kind of stuff. I don't usually touch that or what's going on in a vaccine. That's another rabbit hole. It's kind of like forbidden information.
I see.
I don't really talk about those 2 particular ones. I talk about stuff that people don't know, hidden history, hidden facts. I wrote a series of thrillers where these characters discover this. They discover this Bible code. They discover this code throughout all these book series. I mean, not throughout the book series. They discover this code throughout all these ancient holy texts. So it's basically, it's like, I write, my style is very Dan Brown Da Vinci Code with the cryptograms and the anagrams. Oh, that's a good,
yeah, I like him.
With the cryptograms and the anagrams and stuff, but my stuff is actually real, whereas his kind of is more fiction. Mine, the best way I could describe my series is very, very, very close parallel reality. Parallel universe to ours.
Micah, I'm going to do this because we've already answered all Mike's questions over here. So he's just going to wrap up the show and we'll be finished in about 5 seconds.
No, there's definitely a huge audience for that subject. And I think a lot of people are interested in sort of, so as you said, the hidden histories behind, the whole human race. Because there's so much that we know on the surface and there's so much that people really, want to know, and people love to sort of explore other alternatives to what we have disposed to us.
Right. I mean, just as an example, in my first book, I talk about who was the first president.
Well, so we know it's George Washington,
right,
as we're taught.
That's what we're taught. Well, George Washington became president in 1789. We became a country in 1776. Who was running things for 13 years?
That's a good point.
It's just these types of things that I talk about in my series where you basically uncover a lot of this hidden history. The books have been very well received. They've been very well received, and they're fun. It's like if Robert Langdon from Dan Brown was like a young smart aleck kid and his smart aleck friends. They're funny thrillers because they're young, they're in their 20s, they're brilliant. I have a psychologist, I have a quantum physicist, I have a tech nerd, I have a guy who my main character went to med school.
And these are all the protagonists of your
These are all
book.
the protagonists. There ends up being about 6 of them.
Wow.
And they all, believe it or not, all these subjects tie into the storyline. Like at some point they need somebody to break in, with the tech, and sometimes they need somebody to talk about quantum physics, or there's a code based on string theory or things of that nature.
I told you he was the Big Bang guy.
No.
He's right from the Big Bang. I think this is Big Bang for astrophysics. It'll be the next series we see. So
I hope so. I'm working on it.
We should get his autograph before the show's
Well,
over.
I already signed your books for you.
All right.
Look at that.
Yes, he
See?
did.
Look
Yes,
at that,
he did.
Bill. You got what you
It
wanted.
looks like number 22. His signature looks like the number 22, but if he says that's his signature,
It'll be a good lotto number for you to play later. But
There you go.
before
if I win, I'm your best customer.
Before we continue, I just want to add that you are listening to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Mike DeMarco, along with Bill Horan, and today you are being introduced to Micah Dank, a local author who grew up in Rockville Center, who now lives in Baldwin, who has written 7 books into, well, apparently now 8 and maybe even 9. They just keep coming and coming on astro-theology called Into the Rabbit Hole. Now, for the listeners out there who are, I guess, unfamiliar with the subject, could you give us sort of your definition of what astro-theology is and how it sort of plays an important role in the main sort of plot to your book?
Right. Well, okay, for example, the Bible was never meant to be taken literally. There's a very nice quote from John Dominic Crossan that I always use when I give my PowerPoint presentations, because I do a lot of podcasts. I've done maybe 300 in the last 2 years. He says, it's not that the ancients wrote symbolic stories. No, what does he say? He says, it is not that the ancients wrote literal stories and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically. It's that they wrote it symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take it literally. And that's basically the point of my book series. It basically just decodes biblical passages, as keys that these characters need to do to get through. Astrotheology, the best way to describe it is basically just the mythology of the zodiac. Because what the ancients used to do is they would look at the stars, they would see all this crazy stuff going on, they'd see meteors, they would see this, and then they'd be like, oh, that's Zeus, and he's doing this, and he's doing this, and they're doing this. They came up with these fantastical stories. And what they did was they passed it down orally to their children. And then eventually society learned how to write. And so they started writing these down. And over time, we now take these literally when they were supposed to be taken symbolically the whole time. And there's an astrological code through that. With astrology, I've gone through the Book of Mormon, I've gone through the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. I've gone through the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Quran, the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the Sumerian story. I've gone through the Code of Hammurabi, even the Quran. All these books are based on this particular code. And I teach people this through my writing and through my PowerPoint presentations when I do YouTube videos.
Wow. It's extremely detailed and well thought out. And the fact that you managed to take these sort of hidden truths in history and like incorporate it into your story, I think it's great. Actually sounds extremely interesting, and I'm actually enticed to actually take a look at this.
Yeah.
What's your story, the book that you wrote now? How does it start out? What sort of drives sort of the main character or the main character's storyline? So
basically, the book opens up with my character Graham Newsden, who's incidentally, Newsden is an anagram for Snowden. All my characters' names are anagrams for people in real life. Wow. Okay, so I've encoded it that way too. He's an alcoholic. He's a functioning alcoholic, and he's going to Harvard Med School. And he gets a call that from his mother, who's an alcoholic too, that his brother, who was a Navy SEAL or a Marine, he was a Marine, dies. And he has to go to Washington, D.C. to pick up a medal from the president for his bravery. And then it turns into this, well, did he die? Did he kill himself? And then it goes into these big conspiracy theories about...
The rabbit hole begins.
Right, about like Manchurian Candidate type stuff. Things of that nature. And then the story just builds from there,
Wow.
So that's basically how it starts. And at the beginning of the book, he doesn't really believe any of these secret codes. He's kind of like asleep in a way. And then by the end of the first book, he's like wide awake. And then he just becomes this mosh pit of information.
So the main character can almost represent, not so much represent, but can draw similarities to, let's say, a reader who's also sort of in the dark about all these truths. And as the protagonist becomes awakened to these truths, so does the reader in a way.
Well, I mean, my main character, he's what is he? He's 21 or 22 at the beginning, which is not far off from the people at the school. So I kind of write them as young and immature. I'm 38 now, so I had to like go back and basically, it's a lot of conversations that I've had with my friends, like just joking around. You know, I put a lot of humor in the books to lighten the mood and everything. You know, it's kind of like they're like humorous thrillers, humorous Dan Brown thrillers.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I do. And I just keep writing, and every time I have one, I just talk to my publisher and send it to them, and they edit it and we get it out the door.
It gives something people to identify with, you know, makes it accessible.
It sounds like it's an interesting read. And but if this is your life, right? This is your career.
Yeah.
Do you now, like when you sit on a bus seat, question, will it break under me, or is it designed to poison me? Or I see you have a Snapple iced tea here. Is that going to make my hair grow 3 feet longer, or make my beard fall out?
So you have to, when you get into conspiracies, one of my main characters, well, he's like a major minor character. He's a recurring character, but he's not in very long in each book. There's this guy named Blur Slanders, and he's basically the spitting image of Alex Jones, if you guys know who he is. The conspiracy guy from InfoWars. Oh. And he basically shares all these conspiracy things. You have to be careful, though, because when you start to go down conspiracies and rabbit holes like that, you know, it's very easy to get lost. When you start to believe something, when you find out something, we were lied to about something, it's hard not to think that we were lied to about every little thing. You know, so a lot of it is just kind of checking yourself and just making sure, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Can I read? And I don't go into things like 9/11 or vaccines or any of that kind of stuff because it's too controversial. I go into stuff that people don't know about.
Yes.
Is that good, though, or almost bad? Because now it's, as you say, they don't know about it. And then there's a conspiracy about it. Is that almost throwing, what would you call it, fuel on the fire to make the conspiracy?
The books are controversial. I get some hate online from it, especially when I do my podcast about astro-theology. I've been called the devil. I've been called the Antichrist, you know, by people who don't know any better. And I'm just slowly starting to talk to more and more influential people. And it's starting to build up, and I'm kind of hoping that one of these TV producers will take a look at it and go, yeah, it sounds good, you know, and then that's all it needs, you know, because I've always believed in it. You know, when you start to write, you're always wondering if it's good enough. I knew at the beginning it was good enough. That's why I suffered through 200 rejections, and it didn't faze me, because I knew it just needs one. You know, I don't care how small the book publisher is, it just needs to get published.
And you have to trust your own story, you know?
You have to trust your own story, yeah. I mean, I only write about things that kind of blow my mind to begin with. I only woke up to a lot of this stuff when I was 30 years old. So to be able to get this to high school and college kids too, I would have done anything to just woken up to all this kind of stuff, you know, 13, 14 years ago. But that's what I'm just trying to do. I'm trying to teach people hidden history. And I do it through fiction because that's kind of how you have to do it. Because if I had written a nonfiction book about all the stuff, it would be a very small community that would have picked it up. But when you write fiction, it just opens everything up.
It's true.
You know, and I have an English degree, so I've written enough papers in my life. You know, I was an actor in high school too. High school and college, I was an actor. So
it's just his background would be a book. Forget the theology. I'm listening to what you said. You're the English major.
Yeah.
You were the mortgage banker, I think you said, or in the mortgage business.
Yeah.
Then you moved up to Boston. Then you had another position. Now you're the astro-theologist.
Yeah.
I mean, that.
I teach it at an elite syncretism school.
And you were probably a punt returner for the Giants.
No.
No? Okay. We got to work that in there someplace.
Maybe a little side project, you know. Yeah. But before we continue, once again, I just want to add that you are listening to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Mike DeMarco, along with Bill Horan, and today you are being introduced to Micah Dank, a local author who grew up in Rockville Center, now lives in Baldwin, who has written 7+ books, 8, 9 into a series on astro-theology called Into the Rabbit Hole. So I have a question I have here now. How did Einstein and Case, I hope I'm saying that correctly, access the Akashic Records, and how did it help them? and I believe this was encoded into your book.
Yes, it was. There was one part. I don't want to give anything away, but it was encoded.
Well, without giving anything away, can you explain what this Akashic Records
the
is? The
Akashic Records, for people who don't know what they are, is it's basically it's not in our dimension, but it's an interdimensional book that contains all the thoughts, words, conversations of everybody throughout history. Okay, so it's this one long book of everything. Okay, they say it's a book because the idea of information being spread out through the quantum universe is too much for a lot of people to grasp. But hypothetically, it's a book. And what Edgar Cayce used to do, he was called the Sleeping Prophet. He's the one who he used to basically put himself under self-hypnosis and give people readings, and they were always dead on accurate. You know, like Nostradamus type stuff. He would put himself to sleep, and he said he would access this book or this information field. And he's the one who talked about what really happened to Atlantis throughout his works. And Einstein was able to do it too, because Einstein said, when I'm trying to figure out a problem and I'm thinking about it too much, nothing comes, but I have to clear my mind. When I clear my mind, then the answer it's almost like it's downloaded into me. And that's basically how I feel about writing these books too, is basically the information is basically just downloaded into me and I'm just the conduit. Like I've never had, I'm 8 books in, 7 and 8 are with the publisher, 6 are out, and I've never really had writer's block. I've never experienced that. If anything, I've always had too much information.
Well, that's a good thing if you're a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially in the kind of topics that I talk about, it's stuff that people wouldn't know. Like, people send me messages that I've changed their life, that they've never thought of this, that they let go of a lot of religious guilt because of the stuff that I teach, that I talk about. Mm-hmm. I know how it must sound to people, but I do have a YouTube channel where I explain a lot of this stuff about astro-theology, and then the writings is just basically a mix of that with hidden history, forbidden knowledge, things of that nature.
And now if someone wanted to look you up on YouTube, how could they find you?
Just look up Micah Dank.
Micah Dank?
Yeah. I just started the YouTube channel like a month ago or 3 weeks ago. It's got like 700 people in it. It's nothing crazy, but it is getting shared.
Wow. I'm so surprised that, it's fantastic to hear that you don't get writer's block and the story just flows, especially with the topics that you write about. I mean, how intricate that you can weave in between your story all of these theories and hidden histories, and for you it just flows like naturally, which I think is great. And I think it's these are very, very deep topics. Yes,
these are incredibly deep topics, and I just kind of, like you said, I just kind of weave through them back and forth. I'm very good at writing a story around something. I'm very good at that. I've learned that. I didn't initially want to be a writer, but when I started studying and learning astro-theology, I knew that I had to write about it, and I knew I had to write about it in a different way than other people were writing about it.
What was it like writing your first book? How did the creative process go? Because having not written a book before, or not having an intention of becoming a writer, how did you manage to get all this translated on paper? So the first book was hard for me. It took me about 2 years to write, literally 2 years to write. I kept just thinking I can make it better, this and that. I had X amount of information that I wanted to include into it. And then it was a little choppy at first, and you just get better over time. What I basically do to write, in case anybody wants to know my process, what I do is when I come across something that I think is funny that a character will say to another, or I come across a piece of information that I'd like to share with people, or I just think of an idea for a story, I'll either text it to myself or I'll write it down in a Word document on my computer. Then I do that or like I'll be scrolling the internet or whatever, and I'll see something, I'll take a screenshot and I'll put it in a folder on my phone. Then what I do is I transfer it all onto a Word document. And then what happens is, after doing research for a few months or so, you end up with like 12 to 15 pages. Then, once I have my plot, once I know the plot, I can kind of just fill in the rest. You just have too much information. My first book took 2 years. My 7th book I wrote in 19 days. Wow.
Mike, I have to tell both, and Micah, I'm sitting here thinking, and you mentioned about getting on TV, etc., and there's certain things you need for a TV show, and I'm trying to put them all together. So what I think for you, it would be called The Real Housewives of Astro-theologists on the Jersey Shore. You get the best of everything. And if you can even get 2 out of the 3 Kardashians to be the wives, this would sell. I mean, you would be on every night. You would beat out Mama June and Honey Boo Boo and all the other people on cable TV.
That sounds horrifying.
It is, but it sells. And it's like wrestling. If it sells, it's a good thing. So that gets a lot of people in.
I got to say, you got the right momentum. I mean, it's, all projects start out a little slow. And I guess like to, get the rabbit hole published, you sort of have to dive into a rabbit hole to complete the rabbit hole, so to speak. But once you're in and, everything, it's just going to flow naturally to you. And it seems like, you got, you reached out to other publishers, you got someone working on this TV deal. All you got to do is just keep up the same momentum. I mean, a book in 19 days, that's impressive. And that's great.
Micah, someone who wants to know more about this and even start without necessarily your books, is there a way, and I don't mean this as a joke, is there like Astro-theology for Dummies or the Beginner's Guide to Astro-theology?
That's what I do. A lot of people, like the people I mentioned, Santos Bonacci, who's one of the first people that introduced me, kind of blew my mind. I now teach for him. They're very complicated topics, and I've been told that I'm very good at dumbing it down to make it very easy. That's
what I love. Someone who can make it simple.
Right.
Because if you can make it simple, that's where we have to start. If it's too complicated, we say, let's move on to something else and have dinner or something.
Right.
So, but this has been very revealing and a lot of interesting points you brought up today. So thank you so much for introducing us to this world. And if someone wants to know more and get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So I have a YouTube channel. Just look up Micah Dank. I would suggest watching the introduction video. And because I'm a jackass, I didn't create that video first. So it's like in the middle of the pile. So just find the introduction video. It's about an hour and 16 minutes. Watch it. It's my own work. 90 to 95% of it is my own work.
And is there a website we should know about?
There's no website because I had an issue with the host provider. So what I am on Instagram and Facebook at Micah Dank.
And that's D-A-N-K.
D-A-N-K. And I'm on Twitter at Real Mr. Dank. So for people listening, if you wanted to reach out or you're interested, I will send you videos. Yeah.
And how can people find your book?
You can go on Amazon. Well, if you reach out to me on social media, I do sell signed copies too.
Great.
Micah, I'm sorry we're running out of time. I want to thank you for being here today. And for our audience, our guest has been Micah, D-A-N-K, Micah Dank. He's a local author who grew up in Rockville Center and now lives in Baldwin. And he's written 7 books into a series on astro-theology called Into the Rabbit Hole. Micah, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I'd like to let our audience know I'm Bill Horan. I'm here with Mike DeMarco. We thank you for listening to this week's special edition of My Hometown.
We like to get your feedback on My Hometown. Send your comments to WHPC@ncc.edu. Nassau Community College, where success starts and continues. Till next time, this is Bill St. James. And remember, there's no town like your hometown.